Well, thank you very much. With an introduction like that, the smart play on my part is to say, thank you, listen to everything she said, go have lunch. Well, it's a wonderful time to be back, and I was here a couple of years ago, and they had a very close vote and invited me back again, so I'm happy to get to be here a part of this great conference. I know that a lot of people have been sort of blown away by the box office success of the new Jurassic Park movie. It got over $500 million in its very first weekend, setting all kinds of brand new records. Some of you think that that'll never be broken, but I'm here to tell you, this summer, a blockbuster is coming out. It's a new Disney picture, and it will probably eclipse Jurassic Park. It stars President Obama, and it's called Honey, I Shrunk the Economy. Now, the president has been telling us that the economy is doing very well, and it's in recovery. Interestingly, I meet people every day out there on the campaign trail, and their economy is not in recovery. I'm talking to people who sweat through their socks every day, lifting heavy things, and they don't come up and say, I'm doing swimmingly well, because they're not. Far too many people in this country are working harder than they have ever worked before, and they have a whole lot less to show for it. Since the year 2000, 5 million of our fellow citizens have lost a job in manufacturing. 60,000 manufacturing plants have closed, shuttered their doors. The jobs have moved elsewhere. I found it real interesting that in this week's trade bill vote, one of the things that got it over the edge was selling it to us on the idea it was going to create a lot of new jobs and then building in a provision of billions of dollars to help all the people who were going to lose their jobs. Did anybody not see the irony of that? I am absolutely for free trade. But it's not free trade if it isn't fair trade, and if we don't enforce both sides of the trade deal, that isn't free trade. I have no doubt that some people are going to make a lot of money. I'm just not sure they're Americans. I have a good idea that a lot of people who voted for it didn't read it. I know some of the people who did read it decided that they could not support it because of the governance aspects of it. If we don't hold trading partners to the same standards that we have to agree to, whether it's environmental standards or economic standards, or whether it's a guard against the theft of intellectual property, or whether it's something as simple as not having our trading partner manipulate their currency so that they can import things to us, but we'll never be able to export to them, then we need to be fighting for Americans. I'm not, as some people try to say, oh, he's a populist. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean, but here's what I am. I am not some globalist that believe that we sell our strength away to some foreign government. I don't care who it is. We make America strong and give Americans the best fruits of our hard work. To be free, a country has to do three things. It has to be able to feed itself. One of the great gifts that the farmers and ranchers of America give to us is the lowest cost of food and fiber on our tables of anybody in the world. And we don't thank them enough and appreciate what they do. We spend about 7% of our total family budget on food, the lowest in the world. And it is not only the least expensive, but it's also the safest food supply in the world and the most reliable. And now we've got states like California that seem absolutely hell-bent to make sure that the farmers who put the salads on our table are unable to continue to grow the crops that feed us and the rest of the world. I guess they are intent on making sure that one day we start importing the things that we once exported. If we don't feed ourselves and we begin to import what we eat, just remember that whoever is feeding us owns us. It is not only a food issue, it is a freedom issue. And by that same token, to be free, a country has to be able to fight for itself by building its own weapons of self-defense. You can't have a free country if you can't defend your country independent of anybody else providing the assistance. If we can't build our own airplanes, tanks, and bombs, and bullets, and trucks, and we have to wait until somebody is willing to sell them to us, we're going to be held hostage by whoever it is who can build our fighting apparatus. And then we need to be able to fuel ourselves. To be free, a country has to be able to provide its own energy needs. I am convinced that one of the things that will make America a much stronger country is when we no longer import 1 ounce of energy, and instead we explore and exploit the energy that we have in our own midst. We have 600 to 700 years of reliable, usable energy under our feet. And I know that there are some people who say, well, it might hurt the environment. The methods we have of harvesting it are really not that worrisome. Oh, I know the president is worried more about global warming than he is ISIS. And he's actually had the audacity to say that it was the single most significant problem we face. I never have understood how that a sunburn is worse than a beheading, but the president must think it is. But our energy policy is not only about inexpensive energy for Americans and the ability to export, but it's a matter of keeping us free, because if we depend upon somebody else to supply our energy, they own us over that. For far too long, we have allowed the Saudis to dictate to us foreign policy as well as virtually our energy policy, and I think it's high time that we disrupt the balance of power in the world by becoming the world's largest energy exporter and disrupt the Iranians, the Saudis, and the Russians, and make it so that the strength of American energy changes the balance of power as well as the economy. And I know there are some who say, but that might make some oil company people really rich in America. Probably would. Frankly, I'm okay with that, especially if they become my donors. But even if they don't, I'd rather Americans get that money than I had some Saudi sheikh who then will turn around and fund the madrasas to teach terrorists how to kill us. But we need to explain to America why Republican conservative energy policies touch us all. I think sometimes we think it's all about the wealthiest people. It is most certainly not. That single mom out there who straps a couple of kids into car seats and drops them off at daycare before she moves on to work, struggling to take care of those kids. And the difference between $5 a gallon gasoline and $1.50 a gallon gasoline is a pay raise for that single mom. And that 84-year-old widow woman in South Arkansas who on a 105-degree day in August can't afford to turn her air conditioning on because she can't afford the electricity, bringing energy costs down where she can turn on the electricity and set the thermostat to 70 means that we have just extended her life and the quality of her life. This is about empowering Americans as well as protecting Americans as well as enriching Americans, and I'm all for that. And a country ought to be able to feed itself, fight for itself, fuel itself, if it's going to be free. And we've got to build an economy that no longer punishes people for their productivity and then rewards them for their irresponsibility. I'm a strong advocate for us scrapping the current 77,000-page tax code and replacing it with the most thoroughly researched tax plan, the fair tax, which is the only way, the only plan that actually does indeed get rid of the IRS and turns April 15th into just another beautiful spring day in America. And I think in the last few years we've seen why we need to get rid of the IRS. My gosh, the mafia has a better track record of integrity than the IRS does, making you hang on to every little receipt in a shoebox to prove that you really did have that deduction, but they can't hold on to their own emails for more than a week and get away with it. Enough of that. Under the fair tax, we pay tax at the point of consumption, not at the point of productivity. Most of us all were raised with the idea that we ought to reward people who work, who save, who invest, and who leave something behind for the next generation. And yet, our government, under our current tax code, punishes every one of those activities. If you make a bad investment, we let you write it off. If you make a good investment, we punish you for that by taxing it. Folks, it'd be like punishing your good kids and giving your bad kids an ice cream cone. If you want a certain behavior and you want more of it, reward it. And if you want less of a behavior, consequence it. I would say punish, but we can't use that word anymore. It's politically incorrect. I just know that when I was a kid, I never got consequenced. By gosh, I got punished. I've told people my father was the most patriotic American I ever knew. He laid on stripes, I saw stars. But I understand we're not supposed to say things like that now, but I'm just telling you that if we want to improve our economy, quit punishing the productivity of Americans and rewarding the irresponsibility of Americans, and it would be amazing how capital would begin coming back to this country, including the $11 trillion parked offshore, because people are trying to, these days, they're not making business decisions, they're making tax decisions. And let me add this. We also need leadership to work to get our economy back going and get people in jobs that pay well. And we need a president who understands that the threat of radical Islam is real and that we will not solve it by decimating our military and making us weaker. We are now at the lowest level of readiness than we have been since before World War II. This country must have the kind of military that's so strong, so overwhelmingly powerful, that there is no nation and there is no terrorist group on this planet that would ever want to test their resolve. That's how we become strong and free. Over the last couple of days, our country has seen two of the most blatant, disturbing, disgusting examples of judicial activism in the history of these United States. And I want to be very clear that we don't have a Supreme Court, we have an extreme court. We have a court that thinks it's not just the Supreme Court, they think they are the supreme branch, and they've forgotten the most fundamental understanding of our system of government, that there are three equal branches of government. One of them is not superior to the other two. They are not the supreme branch, and they are most certainly not the supreme being that can unwrite the laws of nature and the laws of nature's God, which is exactly what they've attempted to do this week. And rather than us wring our hands and say, oh, well, the Supreme Court has ruled, why do we not understand that the Supreme Court cannot make a law? They can review it, they can recommend, but they do not have the constitutional authority to actually make the law. And when I hear people who supposedly have passed ninth grade civics, and many of whom have gone on to law school, pretend that somehow once the Supreme Court says something, we all have to bow and worship at the altar of judicial supremacy, I wonder, do we not understand that the notion of letting the Supreme Court overrule all other branches of government, including the votes of people, is opening the door to something very dangerous to our way of life and our great republic, judicial tyranny, where the people no longer rule, 5 unelected, black-robed lawyers rule. That is not the America that our founding fathers created and that our soldiers fought and died for. We can make a better America. Let's do it. Let me bring Byron York out. He's going to ask me some questions. Thank you very much.
Mike Huckabee, the other man from Hope. Second run for president, second star turn at Western Conservative Summit. Welcome back, Governor Huckabee, and now welcome back Byron York of Washington Examiner and Fox News for some conversation.
Thank you very much, and Governor, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Byron.
And thank you for keeping your remarks really on time.
I do my best. All those years in broadcasting help me to understand what a minute really means.
I want to start with something that you just said, talking about the Supreme Court and the gay marriage decision. Yesterday, after it happened, you released a statement, and you said, I will not acquiesce to an imperial court. We must...
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Colorado Convention Center Security Department. We are currently investigating the cause of the fire alarm. The Denver Fire Department is on the way. Please stand by for further information or instructions. Attention, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Colorado Convention Center Security Department. We are currently investigating the cause of the fire alarm. The Denver Fire Department is on the way. Please stand by for further information or instructions.
May I just say that there is no truth... Well, wait a minute.
Is that the fire alarm?
I don't know.
Okay.
I want you all to know there's no truth to the rumor that my speech was such a bomb, somebody called it in. That simply is not the case.
Well, let's give it a minute and see if we can get this big buzz to stop. And
The worst thing is if people say this was the best part of my entire presentation.
If not, we'll just do it out in the hallway here. What? All right, they're telling us to go ahead.
Okay.
Think we can do that? Okay.
I want to know which other candidate pulled that alarm.
There we
That's
go.
what I want to know.
Okay, well, let's just rewind a little bit.
Okay.
After the Supreme Court announcement, you said, I will not acquiesce to an imperial court, and we must resist and reject judicial tyranny. What I want to know is, in practical terms, what does that mean?
Well, it means that states and local governments should ask, what have our people asked for? In order for something to become actually a law, it's more than the Supreme Court issuing an opinion. Congress has to pass enabling legislation. A president has to sign it and agree to enforce it. If you don't have all those elements, what you have is a court's opinion.
Center, Security Department. The fire department has investigated the cause of this fire alarm and has given permission to return all systems back to normal. We are now all clear. Attention, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Colorado Convention Center Security Department. The fire
Okay.
department has investigated the cause of this fire alarm and has given permission to return all systems back to normal. We are now all clear.
Well, that's a big relief. Oh, we get more of that. I had no idea this was going to be a comedy routine.
At least it's going to be the most memorable moment of this entire conference. But for reasons I'd rather not. Go ahead.
I'm going to pick up where you were, though.
Okay.
The Supreme Court has decided that this is in the Constitution, that laws that Congress passed will have to be judged by this now. So what can, if anything, can conservatives do about that?
Well, they can do the same thing Abraham Lincoln did about the Dred Scott decision of 1857. The Dred Scott decision said that African Americans were not fully human, that they wouldn't be treated as fully human. He simply ignored the ruling and said, that's not correct. And while that may sound like it, oh, that's an extreme position, actually it's a constitutional position. And here's why. If we acquiesce immediately, without review, without it going through the other branches of government, it goes back to my point, that is judicial tyranny. When one branch of government controls the entire process without the participation of the other, if the judicial branch, which Jefferson said was the weakest of the three, if there were a weak branch of the three equal ones, if that judicial branch can simply say something, and in particular when it is a very slim, very divided court, then in essence, we have allowed the judiciary to not simply interpret a law, but as both Roberts and Scalia pointed out in their scathing and yet brilliant dissents yesterday, they have reached out into thin air and created a law. And that should alarm every American. And I want to say something to my liberal friends, and I want both of them to hear this. If you love what happened yesterday, just remember that someday there may be a conservative court. And instead of going through the normal process that we have in our democracy and our republic, which is to have a political debate, to persuade people with one's arguments and convictions and to win the votes and to ultimately go through the process of having the people's elected representatives act on our behalf to implement a law, if we just allow a very slim majority of lawyers, and as Scalia pointed out, 4 of the 9 from New York City, not one of them from the middle of America, not one of them an evangelical or a Protestant, that do not really fully represent this country at all, if we allow that, then what we have essentially done is we have surrendered our entire political process. And if we can do it now, when a conservative court decides to reverse it or to make some other decision that would outrage the left, I hope they remember their jubilation, and I hope that they applaud and clap, because that's what we end up having. Our system is supposed to, work when we have that very healthy, robust debate about a public policy issue. Now, if the people's representatives or the people themselves vote, then it is settled.
Let me ask you one last question about this subject. We'll move on after that. But as a longtime veteran of the culture wars, when you saw the White House last night lit up in rainbow colors to celebrate the gay marriage decision, what did you think?
Well, I thought that this is a president who just 3 years ago held the same position that I do, as did Hillary, as did Joe Biden. They believed 3 years ago, and President Obama said back in 2008, and he said it up until 2012, he said that he believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, and he believed that because he said, as a Christian, it was the biblical view, and he had to believe that God was in the mix. Now, if he has so radically changed his view, and now he believes that same-sex marriage is the best thing that could happen to this country, one of 3 things is true. He was either lying in 2008, he's lying now, or God rewrote the Bible, and Barack Obama is the only one who got the new edition, and I don't think that's what happened.
All right. A lot more to talk about in this campaign, and I want to go on to economic and financial issues. Like all of your Republican colleagues, you want to rein in government spending. But unlike a lot of your Republican colleagues, 2 of the biggest drivers of future deficits, Social Security and Medicare, you have said, don't touch them. How are you going to rein in future deficits without touching Social Security and Medicare?
Well, this government already has a long history of lying to people and stealing from people. And it told people when they started working, for many of us at age 14, we're going to take some money out of your check. You don't have any choice in it. We're going to take it before you ever see it. And so they confiscated a significant portion of people's paychecks over a period of 51 years. Because they told them at age 65 there will be this program called Social Security and one called Medicare, and it'll be awaiting them. For Republicans to go forward to America and say to people, we were really just kidding. We didn't mean it. All that money we've taken from your paychecks, now it's not going to be there after all. There's several things that are going wrong with Social Security and Medicare, not the least of which Obamacare just stole $700 billion out of the Medicare budget to pay for his unconstitutional version of health care called Obamacare. But the other problem is that the way we're funding it only through payroll taxes, which means the only people paying in are people who are earning a wage for a living, which is an incredibly shrinking part of the GDP. We have a rapidly expanding part of the people who are getting into the system, some 10,000 a day. That doesn't work. One of the reasons that I'm a fair tax proponent is because the fair tax collects money at the point of consumption, not at the point of a wage earned, which means that everybody is going to be paying into that system. We change the funding stream to make it reasonable and realistic.
So you're saying that you can bring the deficit down
Nope.
without touching Social Security or Medicare
There may
because
be-
you'll get more revenue from a fair
I want to
tax?
be very clear. There may be a time for people who are not yet into the system that if you want to change some of the rules of Medicare and Social Security. But when I hear people say, well, for everybody under 55, that means people who are 54 who have paid in now for 40 years are going to have the rug pulled out from under them. I just don't think this country needs to act in such a way as to be dishonest with the people who in good faith have worked, have paid in. We cannot tax our way out of the deficit, and we cannot cut our way. The only way to do it is to grow our way, and that requires a different type of economic paradigm that I believe a consumption tax provides for us, because it brings the $11 trillion of offshore capital back to this country. Is anyone here doubting that an $11 trillion infusion of capital into the United States, sitting offshore, would that not goose the economy? Would it not make a big difference if you build a chair in China that has no tax on it when it gets to the showroom floor, and it's cheaper than the one built in North Carolina that has 22% embedded tax in it? If you took the 22% embedded tax out of the American-made chair, and now it sits on the floor with the Chinese chair, neither of which has been taxed until the person buys it, now you have a competitive marketplace. Now you can manufacture in the United States again. It's not enough for us to create things. We need to make things in this country.
Okay. Let me move on quickly to immigration.
Okay.
And this is a subject about which there's a lot of disagreement among
I haven't noticed that, but
Republicans.
go ahead.
I am going to ask you a question that Gallup asks people all the time. And it talks about the total level of immigration in this country. And the question is, in your view, should immigration be kept at its present level, increased, or decreased?
It's the wrong question, and let me explain why. We get all involved in how many people should immigrate. The question we need to be asking is, why are people immigrating? Because I, first of all, think we need to secure the border, and I promise as president we'll do that within a year. And I'm going to tell you why I can make that kind of promise. 73 years ago, a 1,700-mile road was built from British Columbia to Alaska. 73 years ago, in less than a year. You cannot tell me that a country with all of the technology and all of the resources we have could not build a secure border in less than a year if we actually had a president who said this is a priority. So we do that. But the next question is not how many people want to come in the door, but we stand at the door, our new secure door, and we say, why do you want to come? And if they say, because I love America, because I love your system of government, I love the hope, the opportunity, I love the light that's on the hill, I want to be part of a government that lets me end somewhere differently than I started, I want to experience this American dream. And I've met people all over America who have come here with nothing. They've ended up with a dream fulfilled. And we welcome people like that. And they love us because they chose us. If they want to come for that reason, I think we shake their hand and say, you'd probably be a good fit.
So you're saying...
But, well, let me finish, because if the next person comes and says, well, I'd like to come too, but I'd like to come because I hear you guys have free education, free health care, free food, you'll let me vote, you'll let me drive around without a license, and I can push to and hear all in my own language, fly my own flag, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. I think I would say at that point, you know, it's probably not a good fit. Maybe you should try it another time. It's not how many, it's why.
All right. We are quickly running out of time, I think, so I'm going to ask you one last question, which is very specific to you. You have made in the past fighting obesity a cause.
Yes.
Wrote a book about it.
I did.
Has Michelle Obama done a good job working against obesity? I'm giving you the opportunity to say something nice about the Obamas.
I think her intentions were noble, but the method was totally wrong, because as I said in my book, and as I've said oftentimes in dealing with this topic, if you want to see a cultural change, it does not start with a government mandate. That's the last thing that happens. It starts with changing attitudes through education, advertising, and awareness. And the next stage that you have is one in which you create a different atmosphere. You create an atmosphere in which people are more prone to want to do the better behavior. The third thing you do is that you create incentives and rewards, and the final thing you do is that government then codifies what has become now the new norm. And we did that with litter, we did it with seat belts, we did it with smoking, we did it with drunk driving. Nobody here today is sitting out there lighting up a cigarette, not one person. And if you did, not only would you be breaking law in Colorado, but the people around you would beat the daylights out of you. I mean, they just would. If you drove a car without a seatbelt, people would think you were crazy. If you made fun of drunk driving and thought that was cute, well, you would be a social outcast. My point is that we have seen a dramatic cultural shift in all of those things in my own lifetime. I've lived to see them. But it wasn't because the government first came out and told us what we had to do, but over an incremental period of time, we began to decide on our own that there were different habits that we should employ for our own best interest. The idea to have a healthier population is crucial to our economy. It's crucial to the future of our children. But you do not accomplish it by telling the school that it serves the exact same amount of calories to a 70-pound girl that it does to a 200-pound football player. That's when the government has lost its everlasting mind, and that doesn't work.
All right, and I think that will do it for us.
All right, thank you,
Governor,
Byron.
thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you, and thank the Denver Fire Department.